1. Early years. Hulk Hogan began wrestling in 1977 under his real name, Terry Bollea, after training with the legendary Hiro Matsuda in Florida. He broke his leg during his first session, but returned to complete training and make early appearances in Southeastern promotions. Hogan's first major break came in 1979, when he joined the WWF under manager Freddie Blassie. He stood out for his massive frame and charisma, but Vince McMahon Sr. fired him in 1981 after he accepted the role of Thunderlips in Rocky III. That appearance, however, gave him national exposure and helped him gain traction in the AWA, where fans loved his power-based style. Despite his popularity, he was never made the champion, partly due to Hogan refusing to wrestle in a more technical style. In 1983, Vince McMahon Jr. brought Hogan back to the WWF with a plan to make him the face of a national wrestling expansion, setting the foundation for Hulkamania to begin, and for Hogan to become the industry's most recognizable star. 2. Hulkamania launch. It was absolute mayhem when Hogan stepped into Madison Square Garden to knock off the Iron Sheik and claim the WWF Championship. That was the turning point in his career, and he transformed from a wrestler to a global icon. Hulk was the hero the kids could look up to, the parents could admire, and the old people could be proud of. Every match followed a pattern that fans loved. Hogan would absorb the punches, the roar of the crowd would reach a fever pitch, and then he'd end the match with that signature leg drop. He became the poster child of 80s pop culture, turning WrestleMania into a spectacle, selling out toy aisles, starring in Saturday morning cartoons, and maybe most of all, making a generation feel like they could do anything if they just believed and never quit. 3. Hollywood jump. Hogan suddenly left WWE in the early 90s, and it wasn't just to take a break from wrestling. He was actively chasing a new identity outside the ring. Hollywood Hogan started popping up in commercials, TV shows, and low-budget movies. His biggest attempt came with Thunder in Paradise, a syndicated action series that ran for one season but kept him in the public eye. During this period, Hogan wasn't signed full-time to any wrestling company, but he still worked select dates with WWE and later WCW. A lot of his fan base was confused. This was still the same guy, but suddenly trying to be a mainstream actor. The results were mixed. While he didn't find huge success in Hollywood, his time away helped him create distance from the stale babyface version of himself. That break gave him the space to eventually return with a new look and a new attitude. This version of Hogan wasn't about red and yellow anymore. He was testing the waters as something more than a wrestling superhero, even if most of the world still saw him as one. 4. WCW Arrival. In 1994, Hogan shocked the world by joining WWE's rival company, WCW. He immediately swept aside Ric Flair for the world title and recaptured headlines he had always commanded. However, not everything was fine, as the Southern wrestling audience at WCW was beginning to crave something less cartoonish, less monolithic, and a bit more raw and technical. Hogan found himself drawing big money and attention, but he was starting to get booed from the crowd during all of his matches. WCW tried to evolve his act with new storylines, darker looks, and threats of heelness, but it never fully came together. Watching him soar at Bash at the Beach yet stumble in the following months, it finally became clear that WCW had inherited the Hulkamaniac's star power, but not the hunger to evolve that had once made him legendary. 5. NWO Heel Turn. On July 7, 1996, Hogan shocked the world by turning his back on fans and joining the New World Order, changing his color palette to black and white and trading heroism for arrogance. By doing this, Hogan completely rewrote his legacy in real time. He became Hollywood Hogan overnight, a sly, ego-driven figure who used backstage alliances with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to hijack the spotlight and reshape WCW's future. The storyline that followed pulled in record ratings, flipping Monday nights in WCW's favor and making the company more popular than WWE for a while. But as time went on, things started to get messy. The NWO started having repeated storylines with the same stuff over and over again, causing fans to lose interest. WCW eventually tried to fix the problem by breaking up the group, but by then, the damage had already been done. Hollywood Hogan wasn't a fan favorite anymore. 6. WWE Return. After his time at the WCW was up, Hogan stunned the fans by returning back to WWE in 2002. Most people figured it would just be a brief nostalgia trip, a way to remind fans of the past while spotlighting the new generation. He was already in his 50s by then, and wrestling had changed a lot. However, at WrestleMania 18, when Hogan faced The Rock, it was absolute cinema. The crowd was electric, and they cheered for Hogan despite the fact that he was the heel. WWE quickly capitalized on this popularity and turned him back into a face. They even went as far as giving the 50-year-old man a run with the Undisputed Championship after he beat Triple H at Backlash. While his wrestling style was obviously less sharp than before, the crowd didn't care. They just wanted to see the legend back on top. It was a short-lived return to glory, but a reminder that Hulkamania still had life left in it. 7. Legend status. After that short but electric title run, Hogan settled into something that felt more like a living legend role than a full-time performer. He wasn't out there chasing belts or wrestling every week, but when he showed up, it still felt like a moment. Fans would rise to their feet when that music hit, and even if he just came down to cut a promo or hit one leg drop, the crowd was with him every step of the way. WWE started using him more for big moments, WrestleMania cameos, Hall of Fame speeches, occasional tag matches. But even then, it was clear his physical limitations were catching up. His body was worn down, especially after years of surgeries, and it was hard to ignore how slowly he moved. But Hogan still drew eyes. Whether it was that heavily hyped match with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 19, or the weird cameos against young wrestlers, he kept finding ways to matter without needing to wrestle full-time. Even when his time in the ring started winding down, he never stopped being treated like one of the biggest names in the company's history. 8. Mr. America. In mid-2003, WWE introduced the Mr. America gimmick, a masked wrestler clearly portrayed by Hulk Hogan despite the kayfabe denial. The character was part of a short-lived comedy feud with Vince McMahon and quickly became a fan favorite. However, behind the scenes, Hogan and WWE clashed over creative direction and financial terms. The angle was abruptly dropped when Hogan left the company again. Over the next 2 years, Hogan made sporadic appearances, including a 2005 Hall of Fame induction for his friend Cowboy Bob Orton, and a surprise return to save Eugene at WrestleMania 21. That same year, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by Sylvester Stallone and began a brief feud with Shawn Michaels, culminating in their SummerSlam match in 2005. Hogan won, but the match became infamous for Michaels overselling his offense. Though Hogan still generated buzz, he wasn't involved in long-term stories and made it clear that his in-ring days were winding down, even if the spotlight always found a way to follow him. 9. Legacy years. 2005 was the year when Hogan was inducted into the Hall of Fame to cement his legend status. He was already 52, and his in-ring ability had declined, but that didn't stop him from making occasional appearances every now and then. At SummerSlam 2006, Hogan faced the young Randy Orton in a match that was dubbed as Legend vs. Legend Killer. It went back and forth, but Hogan used all his experience in a massive leg drop to pin Orton clean. He showed the world that he still got it, and the crowd rallied behind him to show support. After this short stint, Hogan went off the radar and retired from wrestling altogether. He still remained a major name in the industry, as the commentators would mention him from time to time, and his merchandise would sell like crazy. But his wrestling days were done, as his match against Orton ended up being his last. 10. TNA Run. When Hogan signed with TNA Wrestling in late 2009, it was announced with major fanfare, and for a moment, it looked like the company was about to reach a new level. He brought Eric Bischoff with him and promised to help TNA compete directly with WWE. But instead of just being an on-air character, Hogan got deeply involved in the creative process, which ended up shifting the company's entire direction. TNA moved away from its unique identity built on the X Division and homegrown talent like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and Christopher Daniels. In their place, Hogan pushed for a more familiar setup, filled with older names and long-winded faction feuds. The infamous Immortal stable was formed, with Hogan as the centerpiece. But fans quickly noticed the product was beginning to feel like a slower, less focused version of WCW during its decline. Hogan did wrestle a few matches, most notably in a highly emotional and physical storyline with Sting in 2011, but his body was in terrible condition. Multiple back surgeries, hip problems, and constant pain made every appearance a struggle. In the end, his move to TNA was a failure, and he quietly left the company in October 2013. 11. Controversy fallout. Hulk Hogan wasn't short of controversies throughout his career, but the 2015 scandal was the biggest till date. A private conversation was leaked during a lawsuit, where Hogan is apparently making racist remarks. In the aftermath, WWE quickly distanced themselves from Hogan and even revoked his Hall of Fame status. Millions of fans were hurt, as Hogan had always portrayed himself as a family-friendly, unbiased wrestler. They just couldn't believe that a legend like him could stoop so low and make derogatory remarks to other wrestlers. However, there was also a bunch of loyal fans who believed that Hogan deserved another chance. In the aftermath of all this backlash, Hogan finally stepped up and apologized publicly. WWE accepted it and immediately got him back into their Hall of Fame. 12. Legacy remains. After years of being invisible, WWE quietly brought Hogan back into the Hall of Fame in 2019, and he apologized to some wrestlers behind the scenes. Not everyone was ready to forgive him, though. Since then, Hogan has made occasional appearances at fan events, but he's no longer active in wrestling. His body has taken a lot of damage over the years, so it's understandable. Still, whenever his theme song plays, fans remember just how much impact he made on wrestling history.